From the streets of San Juan, Mexico, to a distant planet, Arrakis. Beautiful landscapes, thrilling vistas. A man known not so much for the words that are said, but for the views that one would see. This whole month, the Popaholics are coming to you with a little something special, maybe not super new. The Popaholics are talking about... Denis Villeneuve. I'm kidding. It's pronounced Denis Villeneuve. I don't even think he pronounces it how most people pronounce it. Anyway, my name is Christian. Welcome to Popaholics, show about hot takes out of the hot, tasty pancakes. I said I'm your host, Christian Katie. I'm joined as always by my two favorite sandworms,
Chris Conkling
and Brian Dupree.
Did you say Brian Dupree?
Dude. I said Dune Pre.
Oh, gosh.
So bad.
That was pretty stupid.
I'm sorry, guys. Starting strong here.
So good.
Welcome, YouTube watchers, as well as podcast listeners. We appreciate you joining us today. What is Popaholics? Well, we theme our months. If this is your first time joining us, we theme our months around a certain kind of something. And this month, we're theming it around Denis Villeneuve's films. And that is in honor of the film we're going to be talking about today, which I don't know if I'm spoiling it by the title of what you clicked on or by my background on YouTube. But it's all I got to say is I need to rinse off. I've got some sand in some places I didn't want sand to be. But this is very
everywhere.
It's very exciting. Before we get into our main review and conversation, again, this month is all about the Denis Villeneuve. And a very famous, accomplished director, known for such films as Arrival and Sicario, and something we can't pronounce, but we're going to watch later this month. The man has definitely developed an amazing style, and I'd like to get a temperature check. It's hot over here. I don't know about you over there in your houses, but I do want to discuss our history with Denis Villeneuve's films. Chris, let's start with you.
I don't have a huge background with Denis Villeneuve. I saw Sicario. I saw Blade Runner 2049 in theaters. I could never get that year right. I'm gonna have to do better.
There's a 2099 comic, I think,
or maybe Spider-Man 2099. Yeah, okay, I think the full
it's
in my brain. I can't get it out.
Cyberpunk.
I've seen Blade Runner 2049. I haven't seen Arrival, so I'm very excited to watch that this month. Very excited. So Dune really is only the third film that I've seen that he's made. So I'm excited to dig deeper with him this month.
Yeah, you should be. It's very exciting stuff. I think he is one of the most consistent directors we've had in a while. That is kind of heading a lot of these bigger projects. Brian, your history with the Denis Villeneuve.
So I'm in a similar boat to Chris, actually. I've never seen Sicario, which I actually own a copy, and I don't know. It's the type of movie that I've wanted to watch since I've gotten it, but never been in the mood to put it on. But I did see Arrival in theaters in 2016 when that came out, and really liked that one. Chris, I'm really interested to talk about it because it's kind of one where ultimately I was conflicted a little bit about our main character and the choices made. But definitely high concept and fits with what else I've seen from him, which Blade Runner 2049. I made the mistake of missing this in theaters.
Oh, I'm so sorry for you. That's awful.
I know. It's unfortunate. So I caught this one on Blu-ray in 2019, I think. And again, I've only seen it once. For me, it laid things out. It kind of did the opposite thing of the original Blade Runner in that it laid everything out very explicitly and gave you a lot of answers that I think are best left unanswered to some degree, but undeniably gorgeous movie. And you just
Blade Runner 2049 was the first movie I ever bought in 4K. I was like, I'm saving this for for a good movie that deserves it. And I think that movie definitely deserved it.
Oh, no doubt. So definitely excited to come back to that one as well. And then, yeah, so Dune is my third Villeneuve movie. So I'm definitely excited to get into Incendie, the one that I haven't seen from this month, and the other one, Sicario, Enemy. There's a bunch that are missing for me. So a lot to dive into with him.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe, like, out of all of you, especially you, Brian, being the I think the largest film buff as of late, you've really surpassed me and Chris, that I'm the one who's seen the most Villeneuve films, because I've seen both Sicario and Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, and I've seen all these movies multiple times because I really, really enjoy them, and I'm surprised I haven't deep dived into his earlier career, because he might be he might be up there in my like top 5 directors working today, because he does a lot of things, and I think I personally prefer, and we'll get into it more, and I've said it before on our original Blade Runner review, but I prefer the newer Blade Runner because I think he does such a good job of not being overly deep in his films. He's just such a great mood setter. Like, he captures.
Oh, yeah. His movies have such great vibes to them, you know?
And it does feel almost operatic, and certainly we're going to get into that in this film, of just having this movement and how closely he works with a composer. And I really think has defined modern, him and Zimmer and other composers, I think, have been on the cutting edge of modern cinema music for a while. There's no better instance than this than in Sicario, which I own on Blu-ray as well. And I've seen that movie 5-6 times, and it's such an intimate movie. It's not really about a whole large thing, but the vibe that it sets in the drama that it elevates for something that should be so cliche, which is just like, this drug running cop drama, on the border between Mexico and the US. Like, it is fraught with, like, we've been here and done this, and the way he's just able to elevate it, not necessarily by like the most insane writing that's crazy. That's not where his strengths are. It's just like you get swept away wherever he's putting you, and that is such a very hard thing to do. And Sicario has one of my favorite scenes of all time. I think the scene is actually better than the rest of the movie, and it's just the movie is okay around it and does a lot of great things. But Sicario has the scene, because we won't be covering it, Sicario has a scene on the border, like stuck in traffic, where this like really intense gunfight plays out, and it is like grip your seat, sweaty, like it's so good. It's like one of the most incredible action set pieces, and really nothing explodes. There is, like, I believe, a little bit of gunfire, and so it's pretty tame as far as like big Hollywood action films, but because of the time and place and the characters and the music and the fucking landscape shots we're getting, it's just so much bigger than it has any right to be. And I think he's the perfect director to pick up something like Dune, something that has been named an unfilmable project, and you're like, well, let's get someone who knows how to film stuff kind of best in class. And of course, we'll talk about his other films, but I'm excited, just like you are, to see a couple that I haven't. I think Arrival's a masterpiece, near masterpiece. I
can't wait.
I've only seen it once, actually, but I was like, that's one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life, and I've never revisited it, but I'm really excited to maybe check myself a little bit on that statement. But that being said, it was very impressed when I saw that in theaters, and was just like, again, we'll get into that. I won't deep dive too much in Arrival. We want to give the people what they came here for. Any other thoughts?
I want to say, go ahead, before we get into Dune proper, interestingly, this month, so Villeneuve had a long stretch. I think, speaking to his visual style, Christian, from Prisoners through Blade Runner 2049, he was not writing his movies. So he's not a director that is always writing. Dune is the first one he's written since Incendies, actually. So it's going to be interesting to see the last one he wrote, the big stretch with a couple that he wasn't writing, and then Dune that we're talking about today, where he is one of the writers on it. So I think worth noting that, he still delivers regardless of if he's having to do with the script or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think his films necessarily rely too much on the quality of the script, to be honest, because, again, Blade Runner, we'll talk about these other films, but Some of them aren't I don't think they make the falters of like Nolan. They don't have like blunders like I think Nolan has blunders.
Not actively bad, right?
Right, but
at times.
I never come away from a Villeneuve movie like there's some moments that are worthwhhile. But we'll get into it as we go through his filmography. But I just think definitely over delivering in enough areas that it elevates the work he has. So I'm really excited to see our thoughts on Dune. So let's go ahead and play that trailer for Dune.
There's something happening to me.
Great
There's
feedback,
something
Chris.
awakening in my mind. I can't control it.
What did you see?
There's a crusade coming.
Do you often dream things that happen just as you dreamed them?
Yes.
The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain. You inherit too much power. You have proven you can rule yourself. Now you must learn to rule others. Something none of your ancestors learned.
My father rules an entire planet.
He's losing it.
That is from the trailer Dune 2021, directed by Denis Villeneuve, written by John Spaihts, Denis Villeneuve, and Eric Roth. Score by Hans Zimmer. The budget of $165 million. It is already, as of the opening, we are past opening weekend and into in the first week, it has grossed $223 million as of this recording. And it's starring in the first time ever where the actors may be easier to pronounce than the characters. Timothee Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, Stellar Skarsgard, Dave Bautista, Stephen McKinley, and Zendaya, and many more. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're going to talk actually, sorry I didn't have this in the show note, boys. I often do this. I throw some curveballs, because I don't know if you've ever been to the Popaholics, but the things a bit different
Do
around
things
here.
a bit differently around here.
I want to talk about our history with the story of Dune, right? I think we all have similar backgrounds with Dune, but I do want to get some perspective so the viewers know kind of where we're coming from with this property. Talk about our non-spoiler thoughts. We'll then have a very clear and distinct and, may I add, expertly crafted spoiler bumper, and then talk about our favorite moments, final thoughts, and what we're looking forward to in the second part to make it kind of a worthwhile journey. So let's start with our history with the Dune series. Brian, me and you almost have the exact same thing that I know we're going to talk about. The reason I wanted to bring it up. And it's interesting because I'm not sure if you've read the book. I don't think any of us have read the book, if I'm not mistaken. Nope. Okay. So
I haven't.
None of us have read the book. And the original Dune from 1984, right? Was the year that it came out?
Yes.
Was directed, if I'm not mistaken, Brian, by your favorite director. So
It was.
So
He's up there. He's up there for sure.
So
David Lynch,
have
yeah.
you seen the original Dune, Brian?
I fell asleep to this movie one time. The one time I tried to watch it, it was very late at night.
That
and
tracks.
The movie is not particularly easy to follow. But this is one that I actually haven't seen all the way through. And I'm debating whether so from what I've heard about this movie is even after having watched it, you don't know all that much about what's actually taken place. So I'm a little nervous about seeing the end of this story prior to going into Dune Part 2, not having read the book. But I think even though it was panned and David Lynch is kind of separated from it because it was a bit of a studio mess, I think this has kind of been reappraised. And I've heard some people talking about this as being actually a really interesting movie. And from some of the clips I've seen, it seems almost more like an art installation than a movie or something. Not very plot driven, very much I don't even know how to describe it, Lynchian, you know? But yeah, so I hadn't seen this, but as far as history, my Aunt Jody, who kind of was the big push into my love for sci-fi, big into Star Wars, and she had read all of the Dune novels up until I was at least probably in high school. So I never got into them, but I always saw them around and was kind of intrigued by their cover art, the sandworms, just some of the imagery that was used. So it was always around me. But yeah, I tried to pick up the book one time and didn't even make it through the first chapter. It was similar to Lord of the Rings for me, where I don't have the patience at this point in my life for
You're in
that
chapter
depth
3 and you're like, we're still talking about garments. We've just been talking about garments for 3 chapters. Yeah, that was my experience trying to start Lord of the Rings.
And I'm sure it's great, but yeah, just it's hard for me to get through at this point.
Absolutely.
Lord of the Rings isn't that bad.
I tried that multiple times when I was younger and just haven't picked it back up as an adult.
Understandable.
I picked it up in high school, Lord of the Rings, after loving, the Peter Jackson films. And I remember getting partway through the book and just being like, nothing has happened. I've just been described how things look, how people are, but no action has taken place. Revolutionary for its time, of course. And I am being pedantic about it, but definitely not written like a stunning, thrilling young adult fiction. Not Twilight. There's
Certainly
some books right there. That's some hardcore fantasy right there.
Stephanie Meyer has really mastered the art of writing the young adult fiction.
Chris, you're a sci-fi nerd. What's your history with Dune?
Very similar to both of yours. I had never read the book, but I was familiar with aspects of Dune just from like them floating around in pop culture, like the sandworms. And Spaihts and stuff like that. And I also had never seen the original 1984 David Lynch film. It never interested me. But, so yeah, going into this film, I didn't know a whole lot about Dune or, the political aspects and intricacies of this world. But I'm excited to give my opinion of the film.
I remember it constantly being on at Brian's Aunt Jody's house.
This is one of these weird things where maybe when I watch this movie, it'll all flood back,
Yeah,
but
I feel like it was on
no recollection.
Constantly. Like your Aunt Jody was either watching Lord of the Rings or she was watching Dune. Because I remember there always being sand and like a person walking around in a bunch of sand. And it might have been Star Wars at one point, but like I remember seeing clips of this film all the time, being like, how come we haven't watched this? And it was always just like, we can't watch. Trust me, it's not that good stuff. So I always have this like recollection, but Chris, you bring up an interesting point about how there's so much about this that has influenced pop culture and sci-fi that it's like, yeah, like when I was trying to explain to my fiance what this film was about, and I was like, I don't know, something about spice in a sand planet. And there's sandworms. Like that was the extent that
George Lucas definitely took elements of Dune and implemented them into the original Star Wars without a doubt.
Like sand. And sand.
Well,
like
sand. Clearly Return of the Jedi explicitly has an analog for the sandworms, right? Very similar stuff happening there. It's nearly recreated in this movie.
Yeah. Going for different orifices though, I think. Anyway, so that's our history with Dune. So we're coming at this from not being particularly like knowledgeable about the source material. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. But I have to say, after watching this, I'm very tempted to watch David Lynch's Dune more than I ever have been in my entire life.
Should we do a Popaholics commentary track while watching the original Dune?
Oh my goodness. Maybe if we hit the 1K subscribers, we'll see. I'd say at 5. If we hit 500 by the end of Danny Villeneuve month, we're for sure doing that. I'm going to set that goal right here.
Lock it in.
Plus,
Lock it in. You hear that? Everyone, tell your friends.
Everybody a $50 Amazon gift card that subscribes and comments below.
No.
Brian's still doing that.
Yeah. So let's actually get into our thoughts. We all saw Dune. So I want to hear our thoughts. And if we actually ventured out to the theater to see it, Chris, starting with you, what'd you think of Dune?
Christian, I absolutely loved this movie. Denny Villeneuve
only if there was a sequel, as you said on Twitter. You were like,
so very qualified review structure here.
I have to say there were some qualifying elements to the rating that I gave this movie, and that's because this is not a complete movie. It's absolutely a part one. I mean, the opening title says that it's a part one, you know? So if this movie never got its deserved sequel, it would be lesser for not having a complete story. But despite that, this movie is gorgeous. Sweeping vistas, like the CGI makes you, all the vehicles and the CGI and everything, it's so good. You're just in it. You feel like you're on Arrakis in the middle of this movie. I listened to this movie with my AirPods Max. I didn't go to see it in theaters, but I do have a story about that. And oh my God, with Dolby Atmos, I was just fully engaged from the get-go. And even not knowing anything about this movie, it's such an immersive world and so rich in mythology. And I think Denis Villeneuve does a great job in terms of exposition, giving us only what we need to know before we need to know it. And we can talk about how he implements some of that stuff in spoilers. But he doesn't lay everything out for us. He kind of trusts the audience to kind of pay attention and understand what's going on based on the information he's given us, and will only stop sometimes to give us these expository scenes in interesting ways that are kind of built into the world, which I really, really liked. I think Timothée Chalamet is an amazing Paul Atreides. Honestly, everyone in this film, I just absolutely loved all the performances. But Brian is has a different opinion that we're going to hear about. But I just really dug this movie. When it was over, I had kind of the same feeling that I had stepping out of Fellowship of the Ring when I was a kid, and just being like, I cannot wait to spend more time in this world. And that's why it was so tragic that when we were done watching the movie, Warner Brothers had yet to greenlight the sequel. And I even told you guys, I was like, what a mistake it was for Denis Villeneuve not to fight to shoot both of these movies back to back. With a story like this, it just does not make sense to not do that, you know? But yeah, I absolutely love this movie. 10 minutes into this movie, I'm always talking about like how all of our listeners should vote with their dollars, you know, like support the movies that you want there to be more of, right? Even though I watched on HBO Max, 10 minutes into the movie, I was like, I'm buying a movie ticket, even though I'm not going, because I absolutely need to support the opening weekend grosses of this film just to show that more needs to be made, right? And some of you might view that as silly, but like, again, that's what the studios look at, unfortunately. But yeah, I had a wonderful experience watching this movie. I can't wait to watch it again.
A couple things to respond before we go to Brian's opinions. Yeah, I mean, clearly, like, it drove people to theaters. And I think it's because of the spectacle nature. I think with what kind of experience this is, it's definitely best served in a great theater. You know, my caveat
Absolutely.
Theater quality, especially in my area, is not particularly good. Like, I've had some pretty negative experience going back to the theaters. They're just not in good shape right now from a screen and sound quality. There are some issues, but I've luckily found one screen that I'm a big fan of, that I'm hopefully going to be able to catch this out before it leaves theaters, because I think it deserves that. So definitely there. And I mean, look, it was free to anybody on HBO Max, in which you can get a free subscription for if you've never had a subscription. I think they're even doing like a sign up for 6 months for $60 thing with big, huge slash and discounts or whatever all over the place. And it still managed to gross $223 million. That's insane. And that's very hopeful for films like this and the industry. I also want to counterpoint that I think the film is complete. Like, it says part 1, obviously I'm wanting part 2 for sure. Like, it needs to be there, but I do think that it's a little
There is a complete arc. There's a complete arc.
I think so.
For our main character, without a doubt.
Yeah.
There's an arc, but it's not a fulfilling arc based on. So when I was kind of ruminating on why I felt the film was incomplete, you guys are going to laugh at what I'm about to say. It kind of has the Batman versus Superman problem, where there are visions over the course of the film that are promises for things to come that we will see eventually. But, well, we can dive into why Brian disagrees with that. I understand exactly where he's coming from.
But yeah,
questions that. I understand where you're coming from with that. We'll talk about that in spoilers. But it does kind of have that BVS problem where, like, things are shown that may never come to fruition, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why I view the film as incomplete. Paul Atreides definitely has an arc, and this portion of his journey, I would say, yes, is complete. But in terms of a full narrative, it is not complete, in my opinion.
I understand to the greater story because it is a part one of a part two, but I find it weird that, I don't know. I understand the end game, and we had this conversation surrounding end game of like, what is this film without everything that came before it, and how do you rate it, and all this other stuff. And I think that's a more legitimate argument to like, how good is this movie versus the things that came before it, because it's like the summation. But this is like an introduction, and there is like, our main character has a full and complete arc. The things around him obviously lead to, hey, there's more story to come. But I feel like with a lot of the characters, there is a lot of closure that occurs. So I'm just like, the fact, I mean, because you're rating, and maybe you were using hyperbole, but you literally said this film is a 3.5 unless there's a part two, then it's a 5. And I just, that confuses the fuck out of me.
It was, so it was an exaggeration.
Yeah. It's just like, that is such
I immediately after tweeting that, I was like, it probably should have been a 4.5, to be honest.
Yeah. And I get that little bit of course, the whole package is going to be better. Like, I'm not fighting against that. I think that's very logical, and I'm not saying it's crazy. What I'm saying is, like, that big of a
like,
delta.
how would you have felt if we only got Fellowship of the Ring and then nothing else?
Well, my favorite film is Two Towers, so I would still argue that Dune Part 1, I like. If it ended, if Warner Brothers said, you know what, we just fucking hate sand, you know, whatever they said, and they just cancel it or whatever, they didn't make it, they definitely would have had to cancel it because it was definitely going to happen. See title Dune Part 1. But I still think I would have revisited this film again. So because of my enjoyment factor, and then forever gone, oh, I wish there was a part 2 for sure. But I still think the film stands on its own more than maybe some people are giving credit for. And that would be my counter. I don't think that delta exists so large for your enjoyment. You know what I mean?
I would have revisited the film as well. I mean, we're talking in hypotheticals now, but I would have revisited it solely for the visuals. The visuals are so stunning that they're worth watching multiple times. But I would always feel that the story was lacking in some way. That's just my personal feeling, though.
Especially because it said part 1, and it turned out it was part 1 of 1, which was a weird way to phrase your movie. Thanks, Chris. Brian, I'm very interested. Your thoughts, non-spoiler thoughts on Dune.
So yeah, I guess I'll say up front, just coming off of that I went into this kind of assuming that we'd never get a part 2, just because of the state of the world, the rollout, not because of the quality I was expecting the quality to be bad, but just because it seemed like the cards were stacked against this. So
I'm sorry to interject, Brian,
it's okay.
But I went in with the same exact mentality, and I think that's really what informed my rating on Twitter of the 3.5. Because if you would have asked me if we were getting a part 2 just based on, like you said, Brian, the current state of the world and how much money this movie's making, if I was an executive and I didn't take that into account and I really was just looking at the numbers, I would have said, fuck no, you know? But that's not the case. Sorry, continue.
No, yeah. So I think that kind of, and also some of the hyperbolic praise that I was seeing these days, I kind of just temper my expectations going into these things because the movies can't live up to some of the praise that they're getting. So
didn't someone say that it was the best film of the millennium?
They said millennium, and I told that to someone else, and they said, I guess that means from 2000 forward. But that seems like a silly demarcation point that just say decades. But anyway,
the answer is clearly
anyone in particular.
Dune Part 2.
So, but in terms of the movie, you said it's visually stunning. I was able to see this in IMAX the first time I saw it, and it's the kind of thing that not since something like Tenet or something even way back before that, something like a Prometheus, it just gives you this thing about there's a physical feeling, an edge of seat tension that comes from the scale and the scope that is presented here. The quality of the visual effects and the world building is just magnificent, and you get caught up in it, and the movie just moves, even though you read the plot and not that much actually happens in this movie, for better and for worse. But it's just gigantic and gorgeous. So because of this, though, I think what it does really well is every time we have something that's just huge on screen, we always have humans, at least one or multiple, there to give us that corresponding scale. But similarly, the emotional arcs of the characters feel kind of that small versus the world that we're caught up in. It's hard to kind of get emotionally invested, even though there are, losses and emotional things that happen here. They fall a little bit flat for me because of how big everything else is around it. And maybe this is something that in part 2, we'll get a little closer to these characters and get a little more inside their heads. But the movie works because it's showing and not telling. So you have all these amazing sci-fi things, these force field shields that are never super explained, but you get them immediately from the visual effects and the fights that happen around them. You get, you mentioned there are visions that are handled in a particular way, things like pseudo telepathy, not telepathy exactly, but something like that. I was not expecting as many shameless plugs for NBC's The Voice, but that was there as well. But yeah,
it was weird how like a voice banner popped up in the middle of the movie.
There's the tagline on the bottom.
Catch the Voice at 8 p.m. on Fox.
Troy Aikman came on and said, "Catch the Voice, weekends on Fox." It was pretty intense. That happened like 6 times too.
It was really distracting.
It was honestly distracting. Yeah. But yeah, I think like I said, I think all the acting performances are solid. I think for me, the standouts are probably Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson. Their relationship and what's happening between them. I think they get the most dramatic stuff. And I don't want to get his name wrong. Stellan Skarsgard.
Yeah, Stellan Skarsgard.
In large part due to his what was that?
Stellar
skateboard.
Skateboard. It's in large part due to what's happening with his voice and the makeup, but he's very big and I think well done. I really liked his character. But
I can't imagine having to do what he does on set. It must have been taxing.
To
say the least.
No, for sure. But yeah, I think this movie is not living or dying on the quality of the performances, just because, like I said, you get swept up in the scenery and the worlds that are being built. I'll end on this though. This movie deals with some huge philosophical and ethical concepts that are really just you blink and you miss them, but they're integral to the plot. So it really does leave you with a lot to think about, even though it's not necessarily from what the characters are saying as much as the implications to how we got to where we are in the plot and who everyone can represent in terms of applying this to the real world, which is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting going into this. So yeah, I had a really great time with this movie. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Brian. It sounds like you had a very measured but enjoyable experience watching it. I don't think this movie is without its faults, but it did prove to me that this is my Ridley Scott. Villeneuve is my Ridley Scott, and I appreciate Ridley Scott, and I have much reverence for his work in his films, but Villeneuve is able to do what I think that Ridley Scott always did at kind of a more sustained peak, and I think especially in this, and I know that's big, that sounds like hyperbole and stuff. I'm just going to say it from personal experience that I just tend to connect, and we'll get into Blade Runner 2049 in the future, but there's this level of just pace, purpose, and he's doing what Ridley Scott was known for too. It's just setting that time and place and just transporting you, which is what people have loved about Scott's films. And one of my favorite Ridley Scott films is notoriously panned. I love Prometheus. I think I like that movie more and more as years go by.
I do too.
That was a movie that was crapped on, and I feel like this is even elevated beyond that. It's just doing everything you love about sci-fi. It's like it is amazing special effects. The blend of CGI and practical effects is on display to where you have to guess what's what. It's got, I'm sorry, one of the coolest ship designs I've seen in a sci-fi movie in maybe my life. In the modern era, it's got one of the most badass effects for a ship in one of the most stunning scenes. He has a Sicario on the bridge level moment in this film that is just gripping your seat like, oh my goodness, and it's super huge and super...
Are you purposefully not saying the thing?
Yes.
Are we thinking of the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to get into spoilers.
We'll get into
Yeah,
it. Okay.
it's a moment where Oscar Isaac said, "We're going in," and like that's all I have to say. And it's so freaking good. The effects are awesome. It's something that I keep thinking about this film, and I keep wanting to learn more about the world, because he does a beautiful thing where I do think the movie just has the big epic sci-fi thing that isn't a long-running TV show. It's like trying to do the work of the first season of Game of Thrones in like 30 minutes, which is insanely tough, because I had texted you guys, I was 15 minutes in, and I said, I'm 15 minutes in and there's just too many proper nouns, because you really just can't keep track of it. But what's executed so well is the world building and the different types of characters we meet that you just want to go back. And I've wanted so badly to revisit this film, but I was like, I won't have enough time to finish it in one sitting, and I really just want to immerse, right? Either with a great sound experience similar to the one you mentioned, Chris, and then maybe even in theaters, like going to see it. Now we have to see Eternals and catch up on that stuff. But this is one that I'm going to try to catch before it leaves in IMAX. It's just, I think, a stunning achievement. I think the character part of it is the weakest point. I think, Brian, you do point out kind of where, if I had some qualms, I would definitely agree. I think you're right on the money where I feel with that stuff. But I think the stuff that's working is working so freaking good. And Oscar Isaac just looks incredible. I've never seen a man.
Strong beard. Such a strong beard.
The presence he has and the outfits that they put, I mean, it just is like the best that sci-fi has to offer. And just, all the creature design and the spaceships and all that stuff is so good. I think from a special effects standpoint, I'll have to watch it again. I wouldn't say I was super invested in, there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat, which is a little confusing about the world of like how it works and where their technology is at. But I think it lends to kind of this weird sci-fi fantasy level of it is more advanced yet there is a boundary they didn't cross with their technology, which separates it from others.
The reason that might be the case is artificial intelligence has been banned in this world. So there's a limit to how far the technology can progress.
Right, which is nothing that's explicitly said. You find that out by the source material, which is crazy.
And we do get characters who are pseudo computers as well. They're not named as such, but this is something on the second round I read about it and I was like, oh, it becomes kind of obvious, but they really don't hold your hand at all in terms of lore.
Yeah, so there's a lot of cool sci-fi things that just put you in a very special place, and it is a very big, like, I would say it's very Game of Thrones like, and maybe Game of Thrones took a lot about this. It's a lot about tribes and politics and houses,
various families
and lineage and all this stuff. So it's this big like medieval epic, almost this big archaic epic that's happening in a sci-fi, and they set up smart rules to make it kind of work in this setting. And I think all that just takes a second to get into. But to one of my qualms, what I don't think Denis Villeneuve has done, because he's shown that he can do a tense kind of standoff with guns. I don't think he's proven to anyone that he's like crack the code on hand-to-hand sword combat. I think all that stuff's a little like dry and kind of maybe the most unimpressive stuff, but still within that there are some stuff happening in these scenes that are just like, I do prefer the way he's doing it, because he doesn't do the thing I hate where there's like 500 different camera angles going on. Like, you just see what plays out, and there are some moments that allow it to play out that are really, really special and really cool. Overall, by the end of it, I was connected. I was a little down on our main character, Timothee Chalamet's Paul Atreides. Like, I was like less than interested, but towards the back half, we get some really interesting development. And I really think it ends on just such a powerful note of something that's very classic. And this is an older story, so that makes sense. It's nothing. We've been here before, but I do think the way it plays out is very effective. And again, brings up to your point, Brian, a lot of philosophical, cultural things that it's not spending. And this is my favorite way to do something like this. It doesn't spend too much time about that. There is a greater story, but there's these other politic things happening in the background. And so for that, it's something that like I was so excited to dive back in. And I haven't felt that way in a while with a movie. It's very, very cool. This is a total win for me. I don't know if it's the best film of the like millennia. Like, I'd say Arrival is probably a better complete package as far as like a movie from A to B with a more cohesive story. But again,
deals with similar concepts as well without getting into any spoilers. There's definitely similar stuff between Paul and our main character in Arrival.
Yeah, I agree. So it's a total win for me. This is awesome. You should go see it. You should go see it in theaters if it's safe to do so, and if you're comfortable. If not, it's on HBO Max, which is super dope. I would just highly recommend. Watch it during the day. If you live in like an apartment, watch it during the day where you can just turn up the sound system. The tricky part about this film is that characters are either whispering or the world is breaking in half. Is the dynamic range that I'd give you.
I would say I saw this when I saw it in IMAX. There was probably 5% of the dialogue that I just couldn't hear. Yeah. Because of how it's mixed, and it seems intentionally, like you said, some of it is whispers. But
if you do see it at home, it's worth turning the closed captioning or subtitles on.
100%.
Right. Dynamic range, for those who don't know, is the difference between how low something can be and how loud something can be, and that is used to great effect, but it sometimes frustrates people who are trying to watch a movie and not have it be too loud to disturb kids or wake up anybody or disturb neighbors. This film really relies that you just keep it constant no matter what it is, and it needs to be pretty loud to hear some of the dialogue, which makes the loud parts just insanely loud. So watch on a pair of good headphones like Chris, or find a way to immerse yourself in it, because this film kind of relies on you just like giving it your full attention. And I do think your experience may vary and be frustrating if you're not aware of those types of elements. Brian, you were going to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of my opinions on the ending, because of where the movie literally starts and how certain characters are presented, where we end, I was actually kind of happy with it. The last line of the movie is literally, "This is just the beginning."
Right.
So it leaves you on like, there's so much more to come. But it is very much kind
That's
of a
another
classic
reason
Hollywood
why I
ending.
was so like, fuck you, Warner Brothers, for
Giant
not greenlighting this
cojones
sequel.
on Denis here. But I think for what it was, I enjoyed it. And I think, to your point, Christian, there is a full arc from the beginning of the movie that closed out relatively well.
Yeah, for all its lack of character development, of course, stuff we're going to get into, for all its lack of what I think is like really dense characters, I think the world is so much of a character, and our main character, I think, does come into their own very, very much so. Like, there really is a lot that happens with that I wasn't expecting from Timothée Chalamet. And I think he does great with what he has, but it doesn't seem like a lot until the very end. So I would agree 100% with that point. But let us talk non-spoilers no further. Let's jump into spoilers for Dune. There's a lot of sand in this movie.
There is a lot of sand. If it's okay with you guys, to start our spoiler section, I would like to dig into Paul Atreides' character arc in this film. Now that we can dive a little deeper into it, I do agree with you guys that he does have an arc for this movie. You know, he goes from being essentially a boy that does not want the responsibility of ruling to, at the end of the movie, ruling the Fremen, right? Or at least being on his way to being their leader, right? Kind of accepting who he is as the remaining Atreides and taking on the role of Duke. Even
Sand
though
power.
he initially didn't want to do so.
My favorite line.
Desert
my
power.
favorite line of the movie is desert power. Yeah,
Desert power.
Desert power.
Great line.
Yeah, power of the desert.
But in terms of promises made over the course of the movie to what Paul will eventually become, the movie doesn't deliver on those things. So that's why I feel as though, like, yes, there is a complete arc for the character, but when you're promised something, you want that product to deliver on it. And because it doesn't, but it will in the future, that's why if the sequel never got made, I think this wouldn't be quite as good in hindsight. But thankfully,
Chris
I'm
is
so
like,
excited.
Holy wars in his name are bust.
I don't want,
Exactly. I need to see it, Brian.
I don't want to dwell too much on this because we did talk about it pre-spoilers too much. But Chris, take out the history of Dune. Take out the fact that it's called Dune Part 1. If this was just Desert Power, the movie, and we all saw it for the first time, and we didn't know there was going to be a Desert Power 2, the Desert's Revenge, would you feel the same way?
I think I would. Just because of, again, like, I'm not... So what I'm saying is based solely on what the film is showing us, not my knowledge of Dune itself or what I've looked into after watching the movie. the movie presents us with a future for Paul that could potentially come to fruition. And Brian and I were earlier alluding to the fact that Paul's visions aren't necessarily something that always happen as he sees them. But the movie does promise us certain things. So if those visions and scenes were still within the film, and I didn't know, what's to come, I think I would feel the same way. It would feel incomplete in a way. What's the point? What's the point of showing us those things if we're never going to get to see them in the future?
Okay, so I would say the point would be we're introduced to the Fremen basically as like eco-terrorists. Essentially, because spice is essentially the oil of this universe, right?
Arrakis is the Middle East. Yeah.
If we're taking it to its logical conclusion, exactly. Sci-fi. But yeah, we basically see them as a vigilante terrorist group of some sort who's who's under occupation from these imperial forces. So the fact that the person whose birthright it is to lead these people, basically to have their planet as a fiefdom, right, ends up basically joining sides with them, with what, if you were to relate it to, you'd call them a terrorist group, basically from the side of the Empire, right? So I think that's pretty bold. And this movie, the book was obviously written in the 60s. So the politics of it are, I don't know if complicated is the right word, but problematic at their core. They are trying to deal with this idea of imperialism, what it means to rule, how you oppress, and how you can maybe learn to not be as oppressive to occupied forces. We don't see ultimately that full growth, but the fact that he's going to live with these people who are the ones his people and people like him were formerly oppressing, I think is a satisfactory arc for me, at least.
Yeah, and I mean, so much of the movie is about the fact that no matter what your might is, if you don't understand the world that you're in, like if you don't understand the culture, there's nothing in it. Like, it's just going to cause friction and pain and suffering, right? There's this level of what actually gets him to be able to lead them and earn their respect is actually living just like them because of what their culture is and respecting the area that they occupy. Like, I think all that's really powerful stuff, and all that is completely solved. Like, there's not a whole lot other than the overall space politics that isn't resolved. And it's like, it reminds me of like Star Wars. I think they do the New Hope thing of like, the Empire's still out there, but like, man, Star Wars ends on this really special note that completes Luke Skywalker's journey. And you wouldn't say like Star Wars is a lesser movie if Empire doesn't exist. Like, Empire is a great film in and of itself. It continues this story, but I do think it's a little diminutive to think that like most things that matter to our character are satisfied. We want to see where they go. They finally have reached a point where now, okay, there's an exciting new chapter to begin, but it feels like, and now on to the next chapter, rather than like we cut in the middle of a chapter and it's like frustrating. And that's where I distinguish that this film works on its own.
I would argue against that. I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison exactly. There's no Death Star moment.
There's no metal
in this
scene.
movie.
There's no metal scene.
Like the reason Star Wars feels complete, and if it was only Star Wars, it would still be viewed as a complete film, is because in the third act we get a conclusion. They blow up the Death Star.
This
movie doesn't have that.
For the comparison, this film is more like Empire as far as its ending. It's got a very Empire ending.
It does. It's more open-ended.
Right.
But there's no... I think it's a unsatisfactory third act.
Because the Death Star didn't blow up? Well, I think that turns narrative
what I'm saying
story
is
on
this
its
movie
head.
doesn't have a moment like that. Like
a Death Star doesn't blow up in Empire. That's my argument.
I would say, I do want to say, I think
So you're comparing this... sorry, Brian. You're comparing this first movie to a sequel? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, from story, like Empire...
Your initial comparison was Dune to A New Hope, the first Star Wars film.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, because the Death Star explodes at the end of that film, Luke does have a complete story. It could be a contained story, but Dune,
so you don't think
have
Empire
like
is
that.
a complete story, but Taylor. What I'm saying is, like, you don't need to like be like, and the universe is saved to like be a complete story. Like, it just has a...
But by the time Empire was coming around, they already knew it was the trilogy. So...
Anyway, I'm not gonna. Again, we're I think we're meandering. Brian, you wanted to say one more thing, and we can move on.
I was just going to say the one moment that would be comparable to the Death Star moment is the pseudo destruction of the city on Arrakis, right? It's against our main characters. They're betrayed. Yeah. And I will say, I've heard it talked about elsewhere. We're probably not the best people to talk about it as three white guys, but the fact that the one Asian character is the one who betrays them, really unfortunate. And it's just something that's really easy to not do, and that they chose to do. I guess I assume it's part of the story from the book, but yeah.
And I'd also say that he may not be Asian because this is like fantasy world. He's represented by an Asian character, and to be fair, he gets like there is this level of like that character has so much empathy and actually has redeemable elements to what that character does. So I get the critique, but I also am like, okay, so he should have been white. I don't know, or there should have been more Asian actors. Like I don't know what's the solution.
Well, there's a lot of conversation to be had about casting for this movie that is very influenced by the Middle East and Muslim culture, largely portrayed by white people or Javier Bardem. So it's weird. And as I said, we're probably not the best to talk about it, but it is a little disappointing.
Yeah, this movie also has, the story itself, we talked about how it was written in the 60s, but it does have this like white savior complex that's kind of going against it, But
yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's tricky because it's like, okay, then is it way too much? Like if they casted, because I heard this critique in other outlets, if they casted all of the Fergies, what are they called? Sorry, there's so many names. The Fremen.
The Fergies.
If they casted all the Fremen,
the blue-eyed peas.
Yeah, if they. Ooh, that's hot.
So good.
That's good. That's why people come to Popaholics right there. That's True Popaholic on Twitter if you want to get more of that. If the Furmans were all like, Middle Eastern, it would be like, well, this is insanely on the nose, Like, so there's this level of like sci-fi lets us detach these characters' races
you can't watch this and not. I could not watch this and not think of the modern Middle East and what's still happening there, right?
It's like, I would say that it certainly was influenced by that, right? And whether that's by character trait, place, or casting, like all those things are going to work to draw those parallels. So I think sci-fi works when it can separate maybe the exact thing and get down to a greater truth that maybe doesn't fall on such comparable tribal lines. Because it's like, sure, they could have filmed it in they could have gone too far enough away from Dune, but basically made Dune. Like they could have just been like, we're going to make Dune, but it's a jungle and it's not called Spaihts. It's called, banana hammocks. I don't know what the fuck. Anyway, the point is, and they're like, and we can cast all Asians in this jungle, and you're going to be like, this is the Vietnam War. This is 100%.
The most valuable resource in the universe. You're gonna be like, the banana hammock.
I know, but what I'm saying is all those things influence how we parallel it, and I think that is a struggle of sci-fi. And you take things like, we always talk about the Mass Effect series, and you can look and go like, what are they? The people that have to live in the separate their immune systems.
The Quarians.
The Quarians are the Israelites, right? That is a clear thing, not by how the characters, not by how the characters are casted, not by what kind of actual environment the characters live in, but actually because of the specific plight and maybe because of some of the characters' traits and garments, right? That you draw.
If you listen to their accents,
they're like more Eastern. But what I'm saying is sci-fi does struggle with these real-world comparisons where you're trying to get to a greater truth and you will draw inspiration from certain cultures and tribes. And it's always something that's really tricky with sci-fi. And I think the cast is like really diverse, and that's great. Like that's a great thing, and I just want to celebrate that. Like we get a lot of black actors. We get a lot of we get one Asian actor. He's deceitful. He does have a Judas Iscariot moment, but he does have a redeeming quality, and he's in it. He does. It's better than not having an Asian character in there, an Asian actor. Excuse me.
No, I know.
So I think there's a really good, healthy amount of diversity that's in this film, and it's just tricky because when you deal with things that can parallel global politics, I think that's where I think it's a lose-lose situation. I'm not gonna lie. Like you can't cast all white people. That's not cool anymore. And I don't think you should. I think there's a lot of talent that you can find else, you wouldn't want to corner yourself into one demographic. You don't want to cast them all as the thing that also may align with the stereotype of characters being in a desert. You may not want to make them all homogenous, which is what I appreciate about the Fergies, is that they're not homogenous.
Yeah, I will say this. This is, from what I've seen of the David Lynch version, this is much better cast.
Good.
Okay.
Because I believe most, if not all, of the actors in the David Lynch version are white people. So
yeah, no, I didn't mean to go off on this whole tangent. I think ultimately the issue falls down to the story itself, and it's so integrally tied to what it was inspired by that it's hard to separate for me, like you were saying. But getting back to the original point of the Death Star moment, how this ends, that's the big climactic scene. We eventually get the duel to the death, which to me kind of reminded me of like a Black Panther moment, but it wasn't as emotionally strong because we didn't get
we were just introduced to this character,
the thing
earlier.
He was kind of teaching Paul throughout the course of the movie.
Right.
So I did appreciate kind of getting a little bit from him. But yeah, we didn't have nearly enough to make that as emotionally impactful as it could have been.
We don't even have a name, And the difference, or I would say not the difference, but the problem is that that's great that we are getting to see this person train Paul through the visions, but when we actually get to the person, he doesn't know who Paul is. Same goes for Zendaya's character.
Right.
We've spent the whole movie with Paul having visions about her, and we know that they will have a romantic relationship, but when we actually get to the person in real time, she has no idea who he is. So the emotional connection and everything that we have context for is completely lost and now has to be built in reality instead of these visions.
I want to fight back against this because I actually think one of the brilliant things the movie does is it is very economical about how it builds up the challenge that our main character is going to face. And I don't know anything about Dune. I thought he was fucked. I thought he was going to die and have a white savior come back to life moment, because I'm reading this as the white savior thing. I'm like, this dude's going to die, and now we've got to get into some mystical stuff, which I'm like, it's fine, it's whatever. But they built up the character to be like, no, he's going to kill you. And I was like, he's going to die. And he was the embodiment of the desert, of the way of life that our main character is not prepared for and is scared shitless of and knows that he has to master to become the person he's supposed to be. So I think it embodies the challenge. And also it has this great death of innocence thing that I'm not sure is in the original text or whatever, but a lot of that plays into it, which I really dug of oh my goodness, when I'm sorry, but I was on board when he goes, do yield, and they're like, we don't yield.
He wants them to yield so badly.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
that hurts.
I did appreciate that too.
Yeah, and there's I think they do so much economically with the visions, with the characters around them going well, it was nice knowing you, Mr. Atreides. It was good to know you, and seeing this guy that
he'll give you a clean death. He won't make you suffer.
I really was just by the end of this film, that is way more impactful. And to compare it, it is the Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader moment at that is the finale of Empire. And to me, that's why this movie is very interesting as a first movie that feels complete, but feels like it's ending on a dire note. Even the triumph is the death of innocence, and it's and I think that's super important for a film that is based on some very problematic ideas that we would view as this is just very complicated geopolitical conversations we need to be having. I think it's interesting to play it as a tragedy with okay, now we're moving forward, and it isn't so much of look at how he dominated the foreigner. There is a tragedy involved, and I think that is playing it as well you can with 50-year-old source material based on a semi-problematic global political that. To me is how it's punching way above its weight, and why I'm excited for part 2 too, but why I think the film I would argue is complete in at least this section of the story.
Okay.
I love. Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. I think we should. So what are some of our favorite moments in this film? Brian, we're obviously not starting with you. You are banned.
I know.
Start with Brian. Let's
you
start
should
with
go
Brian.
first, Christian. You hyped up a moment that I'm sure we're all going to want to talk about. So,
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
definitely.
The spice harvester scene.
oh my God, yes.
It's perfect executed action and investment. And I mean, the special effects, the way they build up the sandworm is classic Jaws monster movie shit that we need to get into.
Yes,
Of like,
yep.
just build up the hype and the way the sand moves. And it's like, we know what I'm like, it's a sandworm. And yet the film's still able to make me go like, fuck, it's a sandworm. And
Sinking into the sand as it's getting closer, just something you wouldn't necessarily think of as such.
I love
but
that. How
horrifying.
it vibrates the sand to trap its prey. It's such a cool
I didn't
like
even put that together
evolutionary
like that.
aspect to the sandworm. It's awesome.
so first off, you got the dragonfly helicopters that run on like,
Incredible.
they look incredible. They look amazing. It's like, I'm like, is that real? Is that CG? Which is what I want with special effects of like, I don't know how they did it. Like, that's the exciting, like, it just looks like a dragonfly helicopter. It's so exciting. You have that, they're surrounding this machine. It starts going down and immediately like Oscar Isaac's like, we're executing a plan. We're going to save those people. And you're like, you understand the inherent danger where they're like, oh, they're just screwed. And the way that the wings just drop out and then it goes quiet and all you hear is the air as it's falling through. And then they engage it. It's just like, this is so exciting. It's great. And you get the moment where like our main character walks out and you're like, uh-oh, it's not good. And and I think this plays into a lot of stuff I love. Just highlighting this moment is like the costume design is some of the best I've seen in forever. Like it's so the drink your sweat and pea suit is very, very cool. The Imperial garb is super dope. The ships, all that stuff, the way that it looks, the perspective we get, like that's what's just like next level about this whole thing. So
I was telling you guys that in our group chat that I think this movie is really going to define a generation of new filmmakers, mostly because that's what Lord of the Rings did for me as someone who loves film so deeply. The intricate details in the costuming and the world around them that Peter Jackson and Weta put into Lord of the Rings, I feel the same way about everything that was done by Denis Villeneuve and his creative team here in this film. Like it feels like a real lived-in universe because of all these tiny details that like our brains are seeing but not necessarily registering. You know, it just feels like a real place, and I absolutely love that.
There's also inherent logic in all the tech, right? There's like this idea that like they come down and then there's these balloons that like slow the ship's fall, like of the enemy Empire ships and all that stuff. Like there's stuff you just don't understand that makes you curious, that isn't really distracting. It adds to all the ambiance, but like on Stellar Skateboard's back, that like, what the fuck is the clicking red spinal cord he has? I don't know what it is, but every time he moves and it goes gung, 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 and lights up in a row, you're just like, oh my God, that's just menacing. All that stuff's very, very exciting. But yeah, I think even, to my second, I'll just do two favorite moments. My other favorite moment, and again, gonna prove to the point of where I think the film, maybe on a character level, isn't executing at the highest level. I think on the hand-to-hand combat action isn't executing at the highest level. It's a very tropey classic story. I still think Villeneuve is able to carve out these parts of excitement and genuine, oh my goodness. We get Jason Momoa's character, who, by the way, no beard, freaked me out the entire. It was really weird. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen that man without a beard. I don't know if he's handsome or not, but he's sure in great shape. I think he's doing great. He's doing his Momoa thing.
Wow. Beardless, you're like, oh, hide that face, bro.
Now I understand what happens.
Put that thing away.
Now I know why when I completely clean shave, people are like, oh, for the first time.
It's very weird. Yeah.
Which happens. So I get it. I'm empathizing with him. I think he's overall a pretty handsome dude. But anyway, his like final scene, right? You're like, oh, this is the classic, like, oh, hold him off and create a distraction that almost seems unnecessary, but needs to happen for the moment. And it happens. And again, it's like, I think the special effects are cool. I just don't think it's like after all the other things that are being executed, this again, kind of not the most exciting part from a filmic perspective, from a aesthetics. But you get this moment where he stands up with the spear through his chest, and you're like, oh, I thought
it's just Michael Myers moment. Just unbelievable.
He's a monster.
Has this last hurrah, which is so fitting for the type of very generic kind of character he is. And I think he's earned enough investment that he does earn this like last hero's moment when the film is doing everything to be in Tropesville. Again, of like, oh, we see this all the time, but just that last little moment of him getting up and actually, and you're like, oh, okay, he did make sense, because like if he wasn't there, they actually would have been in peril. And so I feel like this tropey little circumstance is redeemed with character and with gravitas. That I was totally sold on it. So all that stuff is really working. I got a lot of other favorite moments, but I'm no Brian, so I'm gonna pass it on to Chris. Chris, what are some of your favorite moments?
I have two. The first of which is the scene at the very beginning of the movie where, oh my gosh, Rebecca Ferguson has to hand Paul over to like the head of the Bene Gesserit. Is that what this group of women is called? This like religious group of women?
Yeah.
And I believe the trial that he has to go through is called the Gom Jabbar. There's, like you said, Christian, there's so many when he has to put his hand in the box. Okay. Yeah. There's so many proper nouns in this film. This is Timothee Chalamet at his peak in the film, I think. And unfortunately it comes so early in the movie. But I looked at a couple scenes to compare it to David Lynch's version of this. And what I like about Denis Villeneuve's version is that he doesn't show what's happening inside the box. We are left to look at Timothée Chalamet's face and his performance to see the pain that he's going through. Whereas in David Lynch's version, we actually see Kyle MacLachlan's hand like burning up inside the box, basically. And it's just way more powerful and such a better choice to not show that happening, but instead rely on your actor and allow him to be in this moment, because you can tell that in that moment, Paul is trying to fight back against this like primal feeling of pain and prove to this woman that he's above it, right? And it's such an excellent, intimate moment between those two characters. And honestly, that was the moment that I really fell in love with what was taking place in this movie and excited to continue on this journey. It's such a great moment. What do you guys think of that scene?
Well, to be fair, they do visualize his hand on fire and like melting off. And I don't know, I have to watch it again, but I think
they didn't. Did they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they cut to flashes of like a burning hand. But it's in a perspective that you can tell it's not what's happening to his hand, because his hand is down and in the box. I could have sworn that like there's imagery.
That's what it looks like in the David Lynch version.
Maybe I'm tripping out, but I could have sworn that he has like horrific visions of all the terrible things that may be happening. I could have sworn his hand was on fire at some point, but not like
in this one. I think it was more like visions of like Zendaya and some of the stuff that he'd been seeing. He was kind of opening up.
Is there an image of the bloody hand?
I have to go back and check.
Because there's this idea of the blood on his hands, right? I think there's an image of blood on his hand, which may be a callback.
I really think you're thinking about the David Lynch version.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to pull this up.
Because I don't remember seeing that.
But what I will say about the scene, regardless, and I didn't watch the David Lynch version, so that's interesting. I did watch
only at my aunt's house a bunch of times.
Maybe there's like some deep.
It might be like
it's just stored deep in there,
deeply ingrained,
deep-rooted Dune going on. No, what I found incredibly impactful is this scene's very intense, and you're like, this dude's just got his hand in a box and he's flipping out. Like this actor's trying to carry a lot, and this is where I thought maybe it was a little over the top and melodramatic, where Rebecca Ferguson's like the pain and suffering, which she is going through a lot, and I get that. It's just a lot to be at the beginning of the movie, and I think it'll play better the second time through because there's more connection to what's happening. So I think it's better for it. It just seems like a lot at once. But what I can say about the scene is when he pulls his hand out, you're like, how jacked up is his hand? Like clearly he was in like I think it convinces you that something definitely happened to his hand, and to see it not, it's very powerful, very powerful. Brian, what do you think of this scene?
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. This is the part of the movie where, to your point, Chris, the show not tell. It's definitely his strongest moment in terms of what he's allowed to do acting wise. I think it's potentially rivaled by his freak out towards his mom as he's like having
I was going to bring that up
as the Holy War.
I was going to bring that out. The last scene that we've already discussed, and then that scene, I think, are two other highlights of this performance.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are the two standouts. But yeah, I really like what he's doing there. It's very effective. His mother, I actually like her kind of like experiencing the pain with him to some degree. She's probably been through this test at some point herself, so she knows what he's going through. In terms of some other favorite moments around Paul, I really liked, is it called the Hunter Killer? It's very much something that was done in one of the Star Wars prequels. But when the little thing drills into his room and he goes into the hologram to avoid it, it's our first introduction to our little mouse friend as well, which is really fun. Apparently, this is a known character in the book who, if you've read the book, you know this little mouse. But yeah, I thought that was really, really well shot and very tense. Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson, when Oscar Isaac kind of confronts her about having put Paul through the test and how he's changed. And then I think it might be the last line of the scene. He says, I thought we'd have more time. And this is like right leading up to his death. He's welling up. And I think it was one of the most moments, especially on rewatch. It's just really powerful from someone who really has seen what's going to happen coming from a mile away, it seems. But yeah, and I didn't even really catch it because, like I said, the first time I watched it, I wasn't certain what they said, but they're not married. And it's only implied through this one line where he says, I should have married you. And I couldn't tell if it was shouldn't have or should have in the first watch. And then I saw the with subs the second time.
Yeah, it was definitely not even arranged marriage, but like the Bene Gesserit or whatever deal in eugenics.
Well, this is like, it, right? It was like an arranged this long chain of eugenics
intimacy.
Yeah. But which was apparently supposed to go a generation further, even.
Right. That's where, like, again, Villeneuve is always punching way above. I think where I don't want to make this a Villeneuve versus Nolan or anything, but it feels like in a Nolan film, if Nolan tried to have this same sentiment, it would have just been like. It would have told us like the entire, like it would have been a rant, a monologue about their failed relationship that should, and this quick little thing, you learn so much about their history. And it's just a one line. And that's where I really think the economics of translating something like this, like that is masterclass of let's pack a lot into a little. And I appreciate that.
I agree. I like it as well.
Also, I wanted to confirm. I have a. I hope we don't get taken down for this because I will show an image from the film. Maybe I'll go off screen just to.
No, I think it's fine as long as we don't play it.
Well, hopefully it goes here. But this is an image of a hand that's cut across and on fire that occurs is a flash. I just wanted to say.
All right.
There is that. There is. It's a lot more abstract. And I'm not sure we get a scene with the blood on the hand. I was just trying to skim through it, but yeah, we definitely
Christian, I think you're seeing at a higher FPS than we are. There was that scene you caught in Casino Royale that was like a flash of a flash, remember?
Right, exactly.
So you're picking up on it.
He's picking up on the subliminal, the messaging stuff in the films.
Hold on, let me reference back to. Hold on, I got to reference back to Casino Royale. Sorry, I'm trying to. I hardly can do. His eyes turn completely white.
I will give that to you.
That's another thing. I want to point that out. Yeah, when they ask him a question and he just goes all white and then has the answer, like say no more. The man's basically a computer brain. Like this film just drops it and they're like sure. And I to the film's sci-fi credit, like there's so much shit. Like there's so much shit said. And it is trying to be economic. It's not over-explaining stuff, but it is just kind of like throwing you in, being like, you're going to have to watch this again. I'm sorry. But that's like all great sci-fi. And yeah, my fiance gave me a look. Like I was like, no, we have to watch this. I'm recording for the podcast. And I really want to see it. Like we have to watch the whole movie. And I want you to be a part of it because I heard it's really good. We're 20 minutes in this movie, and the look my fiance gave me, like after the first, like the Jom Gabor test of the blind winged hunter killer, and she looks at me like, I fucking hate you. Like this is for you. But I gotta say,
how did she feel at the end of the film?
By the halfway point, she didn't touch her phone. She was eyes locked, and she stayed awake during the entire thing, even though it's 2.5 hours, it's late at night. And I mean, I don't think she loved the movie, but like she got invested enough to be like, oh no, he's like this. Like whenever a character was in peril, she'd be like, no, she was invested. And I think that's like, come on,
that's great.
That's masterclass. Very proud. Brian, any more favorite moments?
I think we hit all the best ones.
The last thing that I want to bring up is the moment in which Paul and his mother are captured by the Harkonnen, and they're in the helicopter.
Yeah, that's a good
and
shot.
they're using the voice to basically force the Harkonnen in the helicopter to do whatever they want. It's such a fun scene. And the moment after they escape, the way his mom's like, you weren't using the right pitch. We don't know a lot about what the voice does or like how you learn to use it and like everything that's entailed with it. And that's just like a fun, like you said, Chris, these little fun, quirky sci-fi lore moments that we're getting throughout the entire film that show that there's so much to this world that we're not completely privy to in this moment, but could potentially learn about if we wanted to invest the time. I just love stuff like that. And it's a really fun moment between the two of them. I really liked it.
And, shout out to your Aunt Jody. I remember distinctly what she would express was the challenge with The Lord of the Rings and Dune and adapting it. I believe she made this comparison like a long time. I can't believe this is in my head that I know this.
Yeah,
she would say,
this is just making me question my reality that you have these sort of memories.
She talked about what the Lord of the Rings series did really well was that the temptation of the ring was always something that would be very tricky, like how the ring basically led you down the path to wither away and succumb to power and all the sins of humanity and all the shit that ring represents. And she was like, that was done really well, but not as good as the book. She's like, the books always did better. And then she would say Dune is really tricky because the voice and how it commands you to do stuff is something that only is described well in the book. And this is where I'm going to shout out sound design. Is insanely good in this film. But Brian, what were you going to say about the voice?
No, just to that point, the first time we fully understand what the voice is. When he does it, they throw off the audio with the visuals. We see her go into this
Brilliant.
outside of herself, and it's just perfectly expressed. It really is. This, and it's all due to the sound design combined with the visuals.
Yeah,
it's a
sound
great
and
shout
editing.
out.
Yeah, there's a really cool Vanity Fair's YouTube page has a breakdown of that scene with the hand in the box with Denis Villeneuve, and he talks about how he wanted to talk about the voice taking over, and the way they did it was they had the camera on a dolly, and they faded it in. They shot the camera forward without focusing the lens, and they blacked it in and out, and it was kind of like, well, in the book, the way he described it was the voice happens and he slowly walks over and kneels down next to her. And he's like, well, that would have probably not been too exciting. So, kind of inventing this new way that we actually wanted to be with the character where he blacks out and suddenly he's there.
Right,
and
in the character's perspective.
I think it's expertly done.
Yeah, that was a great video. I watched it too. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't watched it.
He also breaks down kind of all the set design and how much he loves it. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's why you're so good at this. Because it'd be like, in this chair that she found, he looks like a chess piece with her sitting down. In the floor, the rug was designed by my friend Velma. And she really did a great job with the intricate way that the carpet is designed. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that is why you're the dude for this, because I would...
Well, that's the level of attention to detail that you want for an adaptation such as Dune or Lord of the Rings. You want somebody who's incredibly invested in the world and bringing it to life.
To a disgusting level of like, okay, now you're just crazy, where you'd be like, Rebecca Ferguson wore the cologne that was, she wore perfume that smelled like danger, and I think that added to the vibrance of the scene that you see here, and you're like, that's just too much. That we don't see her perfume. So I don't know why you're obsessed with, but that is the level of detail that this man has about stuff. Not a real thing he said, by the way. That was a joke. Just sometimes I'm
keep comparing this to Lord of the Rings, but even if you've watched any of the making of for Lord of the Rings, the hilts of weapons have like Elvish written on them, or there are cultural details built into props that the audience will never see because they're so fine. But what it does is it allows your actors to really feel as though they are living in the world, and that brings about a better performance from them. So, yeah, Denis Villeneuve is doing the exact same thing here. It's amazing.
Oh, I didn't shout it out, but apparently this is something that's not from the book. We get a few second shot of men being drained for blood for this sort of ritual that's happening. Absolutely terrifying and just filled with this dread and implication of what this society is and how it treats people, small stuff like that, where you could just dig into. I'm sure there's insane amounts of lore that Denis came up with and the writers for this society, but it's expressed so clearly that the brutal nature of this enemy, right?
Yeah, and to that manner, because that's the same like race or people that Dave Bautista is, right? Like are bad.
No, so that race is essentially
Sardaukar, like the emperors.
They're the emperor's army, basically, like his greatest, or the imperial warriors, basically.
Yeah. So who is the people draining blood? What scene is this? How did I miss? I got the hand.
The Harkonnen have gone to that planet to recruit these like amazing warriors to help take down the Atreides.
And
those are
we
pale
see it for
people,
probably 3 seconds on screen. It's a bunch of people. It's raining, so it's unclear that it's blood until they scoop it out and put it on people's heads. But it appears that a bunch of people are basically like reverse crucified, hanging upside down, having their blood drained out for.
Well, on the marker of the Dave Bautista, I would say that might have been the most disappointing part because I'm a big fan of Dave Bautista, and
I was gonna say he didn't have much to do here. Unfortunately,
he's kind of like Drax if Drax was played completely straight, and I'm hoping that his character has more to do or some sort of art. It seemed like if I was to compare this to anything that feels the most incomplete, it's his character. It feels like it's going somewhere that maybe wasn't completely satisfied. But that would be the one thing where I think he's fine for what it is, but it was kind of like, oh, this character just seems like he's just always wandering around. And like the first thing he does is like shout very emotionally about something, and you're like, oh, okay. And then kind of drops out.
He's just the guy who doesn't see the bigger picture and he has to be like filled in. It's like, come on, guy.
Yeah. So that I would say that was a disappointing part from like our cast, but everybody's really great. Josh Brolin, it was kind of, I will say, for as much as I've seen Josh Brolin or other stuff, he's in Sicario. He's great in Sicario. I've seen him in so many things where I'm like, Josh Brolin, you're an actor, you're great in character. From the first line, I was like Thanos. Like, the first time he sounded more like Thanos than I can even remember, and it was really funny. But his character is great. His character doesn't die on screen, does he? He explodes. Like, I don't think we saw his character die, did we? Am I mistaken?
I think it is insinuated,
kind of implied. Yeah, he kind of runs off into that giant battle. When they're betrayed.
Yeah,
I don't think we see him dead on screen. To your point, I don't think we do,
because he has this potential. And again, we don't know the story, but for me, he has this potential to be the ultimate like villain in the future. You know what I mean? Where that.
Well, this is really interesting because it's only implied, but he does seem to be a bit of a religious, like one of the guys who's like big into a religion. It's unclear, but I could see him maybe becoming like a zealot in the future. That's interesting.
Yeah, we need to wipe this planet clean, and then our main character Timothee Chalamet's like, but these are my people now, and he's like, they're all dirty sand people or whatever. Classic.
I actually, though, Christian, his first scene, especially the second time, I thought it was a bit overdone. When he comes in as the armor and they fight. I like the special effects stuff that's happening, but I don't know. Something about it was just like, I don't know if it was performance or the writing, but it felt a little bit overdone.
I forget who the actor was, but the main bad guy in Avatar, is very much that type of over elite commando.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe it's that he's just doing it
this
so
militaristic type.
Yeah.
Right.
When someone sings a karaoke song too much like, the person that made it, and you're like, that was good, but a little boring. I don't know what that reference is. I don't know.
I am smiling.
Yeah. The trailers made this film seem like it was going to be a little bit more fun. And I know they had to do that for like marketing because it was just like it was that
the
scene.
Only jokes in the movie are in the trailer.
They just like pack it full of the only jokes we have, which I think are well placed and fine. But it's funny how this movie is marketed. I was a little worried. I was like, did studio intervention have kind of mess this big epic sci-fi up? And nope, no.
I feel like this is a movie that's hard to market though.
I think they did a good job marketing.
It's always been hard to market.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're running insanely long right now. So any final thoughts that we have on the Dunny?
see this movie. I mean, I know I'm not the best example, but see this movie on the biggest screen that you possibly can if it's safe, with the best sound quality that you possibly can. I'm sad that I didn't get to see it on a big screen, but hopefully at some point I will get to. It's worth it.
Yeah, see it on
You're
the
not going to
biggest.
regret it.
See it on the biggest iPhone that you possibly can find. I actually have like a counterpoint where I'm like, if you have a good TV, just wear headphones or whatever.
That's the situation that I was in.
Best
and
sound.
Dude. So let me paint you guys a picture. I turned off all the lights. I sat in front of my TV. I put my headphones on with the Dolby Atmos. I made a bucket of popcorn. It felt like I was at the movies, to be perfectly honest. Like I felt fully immersed in the film. So if you have good equipment at home, and I know not everyone does, you can simulate, that experience.
I do think, and I'm not sure this is probably the case on non-IMAX screens as well, but I do think there's limitations to some of the screen being cut off when you're streaming.
This is true. When
Yeah,
you're
that was the downside.
Yeah.
So it is worth noting.
Yep, that's a good point, and that's why I also want to see it in IMAX as well, because you were right, there is some cropping that occurs. To my point though, you have to see it in I would say either IMAX or watch it with headphones, because I think the sound is pulling just as much weight as the visuals, and I think even with the cropped version, everything looked perfect. I mean, I wouldn't have. I would only know it if I wasn't told or didn't see the IMAX, because it didn't seem like there was any this is
I
a
heard
weird
about it
shot.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing felt, this is an uncharacteristically cropped, ugly shot. Like, it all looks beautiful. Like, I honestly couldn't tell the difference. But I'm sure if I saw it in IMAX, I'd be like, but they forgot the sand over here. But I'm sure, all that stuff's pretty awesome. Awesome. So that's it for Brian, did you have any final thoughts?
No, that's it. I'm excited there's going to be a sequel. I'm glad we all enjoyed this, and that we'll get to dive deeper into this.
2023.
I think it's
it'll be here before we know it.
I think it's
that date alone makes me think that Warner Brothers knew they were going to greenlight this sequel.
They already
Well, we
ago.
know that the script is already.
What if they already
Denis
shot
Villeneuve
it
has
partially.
finished the script.
What if they already
Yeah,
shot
right.
it? It's like, and it's out next
How
year.
would? That would be incredible.
We greenlit releasing it. It's in post. Just another shout out to the score. I think I saw a really funny TikTok that this guy was shutting a door, and he's like Hans Zimmer, and it was this metal door that was like, and I was like, yeah, but also this is it. It punches you in the chest, and it's really good. They incorporate a lot of choral stuff. I think it was a lot more melodic from a choral perspective. So there's so much interesting shit happening with that stuff that I think that's a very shallow critique of the style. I think there's some common elements from modern film and stuff you've seen in Sicario and Arrival, but it's being done very well.
I will say a much better use of Hans Zimmer than No Time to Die.
Yeah, he didn't get much to do there apparently, but there's a lot happening here. I do want to say the movie starts before the production credits. We get this insane subtitled language that was just mind blowing. And what is it? Dreams are messages from the deep or something like that. Just such an awesome way to start the movie with those whoa or whatever it is happening. Incredible. And oh God, I'm blanking on it. The one other thing.
Just real quickly, I'll say part of what's
it.
working insanely well with the soundtrack and the sound design is that it's almost like the machinery and ships are part of the music, and that's what the whole like. It feels like it's interplaying in such a really cool way, where you'll hear these like, it's almost like these, but there'll be a note. It'll go up, and you're like, I actually don't know if that's the sound of the ship or a score, but I'm here. I'm in the Dune Desert. And it's really cool. Oh, there's also the other thing, the last thing, I promise. I don't know if you've ever been to Blue Man Group, but they're using a similar instrument to the Blue Man Group, which is hollow plastic pipes that are tuned, that are like certain lengths that give it different tonalities. And you get some and they're flying all over the stereo spectrum of and it's that tuned plastic stuff, but it's tuned down deep too, and it's got lower, like there's a lot going on there. But that's something I've never heard in Zimmer scores. Like there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening here. I don't know if you know exactly what I'm talking about, Brian, but those plastic pipe sounds are always.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. And this has triggered my last thing. You brought up the choral stuff. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, we got ancient lamentation music played a bunch of times. Here, dramatic lamentation music was implied. So I appreciated the slight change of descriptor for similar vague ethnic music. I don't know what they're going for, but yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah, you wonder if Zimmer's a genius or he's just like, and let's get that choir that sings that language that we love here.
They're sounding sad. That's all we need.
Yeah, it's creepy. It's sad. Yeah, it's cool. I'm digging it. I definitely need to revisit the soundtrack because I thought it was very cool. Also to hear if are there spaceship noises in the soundtrack?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, all very cool stuff. So Dune is awesome. Thanks for all the Popaholics watchers and listeners. Thanks for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on the podcast feed, make sure you're subscribed, and maybe subscribe to YouTube if you want to see my sweet, awesome desert background that I got going on. But gentlemen, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
Loyal listeners, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Conkling.
And you can find me at True Popaholic.
And you can find my band at Midnight Satire. It is Positive NDA and AR are the latest singles, and they're streaming now. And there's a new music video coming out soon. Just finishing up the finer details with that. But that's going to be my little gift to the pop culture film genre. Not quite Danny Villeneuve levels of visuals, but I think we pulled off some cool stuff. But yeah, there is a reference to some famous sci-fi film, so we'll see if anybody catches that, which would be really cool. But that's going to do it for this episode of Popaholics. Again, you can email us at popaholicscast@gmail.com. Do you think this is the empire or the new hope of the Dune series? Do you have any?
Let us know.
Do you think it's a complete movie? That's what I'd ask. Does it feel like this movie could stand alone should there not be a sequel, just on its own merits? Very exciting conversation. We want you to contribute. I'd love to read some of that stuff from our watchers and listeners. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Popaholics. Bye. See you on the other side of this sand dune.